So we are recording now, and I will go ahead and admit all.
Is that our doorbell? Hey, well, hello and welcome to this edition of Chamber Chat. I'm Jamie Sleen. I am the Vice President of Economic Development and Government Affairs for the Fox Cities Regional Partnership, a division of the Fox Cities Regional Chamber, or Fox Cities Chamber, sorry. Today, I'm happy to welcome Representative Jim Steineke. Jim represents the 5th Assembly District, which includes a large segment of Outagamie County. And he also serves in the State Assembly as the Majority Leader, which is really important for our area. So welcome, Representative Steineke.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with us. A few housekeeping items before we jump into our conversation today. I'm going to start off and kick off with some questions for the representative, and then as I'm doing that, please feel free to put your questions into the chat box on the bottom. This will just kind of help us keep the conversation moving and prevent all those challenges that we've experienced with Zoom meetings in the past. So first question for you, Representative Steineke. So during quarantine, your job is to represent the people. How's that going? How are you able to talk to constituents and convey their concerns and learn about their concerns when you can't meet with them in person?
Yeah, as everybody else is experiencing, we're experiencing much the same things. The world has kind of changed rapidly for all of us. Our ability to communicate has really changed from meetings in person, in district, and at the Capitol, to more of these kind of things where I'm doing a whole lot of Zoom meetings nowadays. About a month ago, I don't think I had even heard of Zoom, so I'm pretty new to this. So we're doing a lot more Zoom. Things are really challenging though, because our constituents continue to reach out with questions about unemployment, the governor's orders, business owners contacting us on what it means for them. So we're continually trying to find new ways to communicate with people. Most of it has been, old-fashioned by the phone, but some of it's been through Zoom meetings and other avenues. Whatever we can do to best communicate with our constituents, that's what we're doing. A lot of social media as well.
Perfect. So there's been a lot of questions and news reports about unemployment claims with over 500,000 of Wisconsin residents filing for unemployment within the last couple of months since March. Can you take a minute to talk about the state and federal government, what they did to modify the unemployment insurance program?
Yeah. So the CARES Act that the federal government passed a few weeks ago made some changes to unemployment, gave a $600 increase to unemployment kind of across the board. I think they're trying to do that obviously to help soften the blow of the government stepping in and shutting businesses down and basically making people unemployed across the country. That's going to present some challenges going forward. It's presented some challenges here in the state where, as Jamie said, we have over 500,000 people who have now claimed unemployment in the last month or so. We now have more people unemployed in the state than the entire population of the city of Milwaukee. That's terrifying. I mean, I hope, like I'm sure all of you do, that this is a brief period of time where we have this number of unemployed, but the longer this goes on, as you all know, the less likely it is that those jobs are there when their unemployment runs out, because more and more businesses as we go forward are having to make the tough decisions on whether they're ever going to be able to reopen their doors or not. So the feds came through this unemployment $600 boost. We passed some legislation to help enable that a couple of weeks ago by suspending the 1-week delay in unemployment benefits. I think it's a good thing. The downside is with the flood of people claiming unemployment benefits, The state was not prepared. The administration hasn't fully ramped up to be able to deal with the flood of applications coming in. So we've asked them to go to a presumptive approval of unemployment benefits so we can help speed money going out the door. They have not yet done so. I hope they do so soon, because there are a lot of people that have made claims over the last few weeks that haven't seen a dime, and there's a lot of people suffering out there. So we're going to continue to do everything that we can to make sure people get the benefits that they need at this time. But there's also going to be challenges going forward, as we know, because the benefits that they're going to start receiving, close to $1,000 a week, in some cases, in a lot of cases, is more money than they were making when they were employed. So the incentives to go back to work when that job does open up is going to be not there for a lot of people, and that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and that definitely has been a concern that we've heard from a lot of our members, is when things open up, are the employees going to be there? I wanted to kind of shift and kind of talk about the Safer at Home order. And I know the legislature filed a lawsuit. So the state Supreme Court had hearing yesterday. Can you give us an update on where we're at with that?
Good question. So the decision is now in the Supreme Court's hands, and we expect that they'll make a decision within the next day or two here. But really, the timeline is unknown. The Supreme Court doesn't give us an idea of when that ruling is going to come down. But it's important for people to understand that the lawsuit wasn't specifically about Safer at Home. What it was more about is the separation of powers and the ability of the co-equal branch in the legislature to have input going forward on what this Safer at Home, or what these restrictions are going to look like. What the Evers administration is asserting is that the DHS secretary on her own, with no legislative oversight, can do these things that they've been doing and do them indefinitely. I think that should scare the bejeebers out of all of us, to be quite frank, that an unelected bureaucrat can have that kind of control over every single business and every single individual in the state. That's what this lawsuit is about, is ensuring that Governor Evers cannot, through his DHS secretary, go beyond the 60-day statutory emergency declaration without legislative input. So we're hearing consistently from our constituents, whether they're employees or business owners, about concerns they have over how this is structured and what it's going to mean for them. For that 60-day window, the only thing we can do is sit back and take that input, but we are not in a position where we can affect things. If the governor had his way, we would never be in that position where we can affect things. And that's what this lawsuit is really about.
Thank you for explaining that. I knew there was a lot of questions surrounding that. Governor Evers announced his Badger Bounceback order, which would allow the reopening of businesses through a series of phases, contingencies, and gating requirements. And then DHS just added yesterday additional hospital criteria, gating criteria. I kind of have three questions around this whole thing. So first, what are your initial thoughts of the plan? Do you know what the metrics were used to develop the plan? And a lot of questions that are being asked by participants right now is there a way that we could potentially get back to business earlier than May 26th?
I would say highly doubtful under the governor's plan. The Badger Bounceback plan, while I'm appreciative that he actually came out with something and put something to some pen to paper, because we had been asking for some kind of indication of when the state was going to open up and what their plans were for opening up. Unfortunately, the way the Badger Bounceback plan is structured, it again gives the DHS secretary a whole lot of authority in determining if and when that ever happens. So what we were looking for is some real definite metrics that we could look at and say, we're on the road. It looks like we're, a week or 2 weeks away from being able to start to open up. His plan didn't really do that. I know they say that they mirror closely the Trump administration's plan. It's true that there are some things in there that mirror what the Trump administration put out. but they also didn't include a lot of things that we would have included, like the regional aspects that were allowed under the Trump administration's plan, where a vast majority of the state of Wisconsin, the vast majority of the counties have a handful of cases at best. So we should be able to start to, in regions that are less affected, start to allow those businesses to crack their doors open and start to bring revenue in. Because that's the only way we're going to survive this thing, is if we can start to get back to, somewhat normal. I mean, it's going to be a long road back to what we all consider normal, but we have to start somewhere. And we have to remember that this was always about flattening the curve and not overrunning hospitals. Well, right now, in a vast majority of the state, hospitals don't have COVID patients. Even in northeastern Wisconsin, where Brown County has seen a major spike, we still don't have hospitals being overrun with patients. There are a lot of positive test results, but not a lot of people in the hospitals. So that's really the metric we should be looking at to ensure that we don't get overrun in the hospitals. And if the hospitals have capacity, then we should start to be able to open up.
Okay. One of the questions we received from a participant is, many businesses and employees would like to get back to work, but doing so safely and respectfully. Do you have suggestions for when we can get back, for how businesses can meet the balance of getting back to work and keeping employees safe?
Yeah, so I mean, I assume we're going to be operating under some kind of social distancing requirements for a while now. So let's get back to the court case to help answer that question. When the Supreme Court rules on this, it doesn't mean, it probably won't mean that safer at home goes away tomorrow. We've asked in the Supreme Court filing that there is a stay on that decision for 6 days to allow the administration and the legislature to get together to implement some kind of plan going forward. So unless the Supreme Court doesn't grant that stay, then there should be some restrictions going forward. And we're hopeful that we can negotiate with the Evers administration on what those look like. So if the Supreme Court rules in our favor, the administration will have to come to the legislature with a rule package, and then we'll have an opportunity to either approve it, reject it, or send it back for modifications. So it all kind of depends on how willing the administration is to work with the legislature to see what that looks like. But I would assume future restrictions are going to look a lot like we see at Home Depot and Walmart and Costco. The 6 feet separation, the sanitizing carts, and having masks on employees or customers themselves. Those are the things I think that people should be prepared for as they start to ramp up. But what I would encourage members to do and business owners to do is to start putting together what you think you can do in your business to help mitigate the risk, because we're going to need that input as we go forward.
Yeah, and I know a lot of our businesses are already implementing those and talking with their employees about how to do these safely. One of the things that kind of popped up in my mind is, the Bounceback order came out, and then the Turn the Dial order came out, where pet grooming services and small engine repair shops and things like that could open with curbside access. Is there a way that we can extend that to small retail shops, or implementing the same policies and procedures that the Costco's and the Menards and Walmarts of the world have, but at a small retail? Do you foresee that ever kind of being like the next step? Because to me, that seems logical.
Yeah, and we've asked, we just had one of the first meetings we've had in a long time with Governor Evers we had on Monday, and we specifically asked about that because right now until May 11th, the governor is still under his 60-day authority under the emergency declaration, so he still has that unilateral ability regardless of what the Supreme Court says. Going forward, that's hopefully going to be different. But we've asked that specifically because we agree that if Home Depot and all these other outlets, these big box can work through some of the mechanics of this. There's no reason Main Street shops shouldn't be able to do the same thing. In fact, my position really is we're probably doing more damage than we are good by limiting the number of outlets being able to be open, because now we're funneling everybody through Home Depot and Walmart and Costco and Menards, then spreading it out and having more retailers open. I was talking to somebody, I actually happened to be at Home Depot the other day, and was talking to one of the workers there, and you know, she had some concerns about opening up more shops, and she said, you know, everybody is coming in here right now to do home improvement projects. I said, that's because they have no other place to go. They have no other outlet. You know, the only places that they can spend money right now are really places like Home Depot and Menards and things of that nature, where I think there's a frustration level amongst people, and they just want to get to some semblance of normal, and that's one of the ways they're doing it. So I think we should crack the door open in more parts of the state to allow more retailers to be open.
Sure, thank you. Another question from the group chat is someone was just on the WMC call where the CEO of the Wisconsin Hospital Association stated that his association did not weigh in on the governor's stay-at-home extension to the end of May. He also said that the hospitals have not been overwhelmed by COVID-19 and that his members are losing millions because they aren't providing treatment and services. Based on his comments, this person is curious as to who the governor consulted, or did the governor consult with hospitals and or the medical community to come up with the date of his extension?
Good question. We quite honestly don't know. I mean, that's been one of the frustrations over the 60-day period here, is we don't know how they're making decisions, who they're working with. You know, when they originally came out with the order, they said, you know, they were working with businesses throughout the state, and the business groups asked them to do this, to implement the safer at home. They said basically the same thing as they went into the extension until the end of May. Even when other states that had much more serious problems like Michigan and New York weren't doing extensions that long at that time. So I don't know where they're making the decisions. I don't know what data that they're using. I don't know who they're talking to. I know originally the hospitals, originally in the governor's plan, as far as the hospitals go, they said if one hospital in the state was not able to respond in a crisis, that was going to keep this entire state shut down. One hospital. So the Hospitals Association was able to get them to 5% in the Badger Bounceback plan, which means out of the 130 hospitals, if more than 6 hospitals can't respond in a crisis, that keeps the entire state shut down indefinitely. So that's one of the concerns we have, because the goalposts can seem to continually be moving, where this was about not overrunning hospitals. It wasn't about getting the virus down to 0. It was about making sure that the hospitals could deal with the demand if there was an outbreak in communities. And by and large, we've done that. And like you said, the Hospitals Association has said that they're not overrun. They're losing hundreds of millions of dollars. And believe me, that money is going to come from somewhere. And it's probably, you know, of course, we've been seeing bailouts. I'm sure the federal government is going to have to come in with further bailouts for hospitals across this country. And one of the things that's going uncovered is what kind of impact the fact that there's not these elective procedures going on, what kind of impact there's going to be, given that preventative services haven't really been taking place. I mean, what kind of impact on health is that going to have? We heard from one dentist that said that about once a week he finds something in a dentist, finds something in a patient that is seriously concerning and sends them on for a referral to get checked into further. Well, that hasn't been going on either. So how many lives are we going to lose because of the delays in preventative medicine and you know, some of these elective procedures? We just don't know at this point.
Yeah, obviously the implications of COVID-19 go far beyond the public health aspect of this one virus and into many areas of our economy and our lives, our daily lives. You already kind of hinted at this and kind of touched on it a little bit, but I know you've talked about, and I've seen others kind of talk about that regional approach to reopening the state. You know, because the Fox Valley is much different than Milwaukee County or even Brown County to that extent. What are the chances of us going on that regional approach and reopening?
Well, if the legislature has anything to say about it, we will take a regional approach. The Hospitals Association has the state already broken into regions. So we could utilize those regions to ensure that we can open in a manner that's safe. I think there should be, it should be that regional approach, and we should be able by region to take steps through phases in reopening. That would allow us in some areas of the state to reopen faster. In other areas of the state where there are more issues, it may be a little bit slower march towards reopening. And then in those regions, if there are outbreaks that occur, you could always throttle back a little bit, you know, in order to help control the spread of the virus. So again, we had that meeting with the governor on Monday. Speaker Voss brought up the regional approach. The governor didn't at that point say he was wholesale against it, although he has said in the past that he didn't support a regional approach. But you know, like I said, if the legislature has any say in it, that's the direction we'd like to have.
Perfect. So, you know that there's a payroll protection program that a lot of businesses have been utilizing, some with great success, some not so successful. Do you know of any other options that you would encourage employers to explore to help keep their workforce intact while they're experiencing the lighter workload during this time?
Yeah, I mean, I know the PPP program, it's well-intentioned. It has helped a lot, as you said. There's others that it's minimal, if any help. I think this is obviously a difficult time for everybody. We've got a laundry list of avenues that business owners can take. So if anybody wants specific information on that, they can reach out to my office, or I'd be happy to provide it to you, Jamie, and so you guys can disseminate it to whoever wants it. I'm sure you guys have that information too. But I would just say uncover every rock, look at every program that you can possibly look at, because I know this is an extremely difficult time for people to get through. You know, if polling is any indication, or surveys, 35% of businesses may not reopen their doors. That's really terrifying. I don't think we can know the true impact that the decisions that government has been making over the last few weeks. We can't know the true impact of that going forward. We're going to see new revenue estimates in a week or two here for the state. I have a feeling that's going to be really eye-opening for a lot of people, showing how much decline in revenue the state is going to be seeing going forward. And even that glimpse into time isn't going to show a true impact, because if this continues to go on for weeks, or if it reoccurs in fall, we're looking at some really catastrophic circumstances, and I know all of your members understand that.
Yeah, the virus coming back again is of great concern. A question from the audience regarding the payroll protection program, and this is a federal program, but maybe you have some insights in your conversations with our federal delegation. 501c6s are not eligible for those types of, for that program. So that includes your, Main Street districts, your CDBs, your chambers of commerce, other trade organizations that are really helping businesses to kind of get through this time. Have you heard if there's anything going on at the federal level to address any more issues with the PPP program?
Yeah, I think they continue to have conversations on a regular basis. I know it's a constantly moving target as they negotiate what's going to happen in the future with a future CARES Act or whatever that's going to look like. I can bring that up specifically to Congressman Gallagher. We talk on a regular basis, but I haven't heard anything specifically regarding the 501c6s. But I'm happy to ask on your behalf and see if I can find something out.
And Congressman Gallagher has been very supportive. I believe our problem is in the Senate with Senator Marco Rubio, from what I'm hearing. But anyone that can actually help us communicate that and get that message out we would appreciate that as well.
Okay.
Getting back to what is the new normal, which is a term that I just detest because I don't think this is a new normal. I think this is a temporary normal, but some of the habits that we've now have because of this are going to translate and stay longer. We have a question here about when we do reopen, do you think that we're gonna have to wearing masks, would that be required?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know. I think that is likely to be part of a reopening plan for businesses. At least I wouldn't be surprised. I've seen other states going in that direction, requiring masks at businesses, whether they're for employees or for customers. That could be a thing. But I don't know if everybody else has had the same experience I have, but when I've been out and seen people wearing masks, a lot of the times it's not covering their nose, which is a problem. A lot of the times they're walking through the stores and they're pulling them down and putting them up. Not really helpful, right? And so I'm not sure, how much overall good that those do. But I'll tell you, I talking to business owners that I know, if the state came in and said, you can open your doors tomorrow, just use social distancing and have people wear masks, I think a vast majority of them would take that deal just to get their doors open and start to be able to collect some revenue.
Yeah. So you don't think anything would come from the state, but it would most likely be from the private sector saying, hey, this is our policy, kind of like Menards.
Yeah, I mean, I at least initially that's how I'd see it. I mean, we're in the process of obviously trying to negotiate with the governor any changes. So one of the questions we've been asked a lot is, what is the GOP plan for reopening? And quite honestly, I know that there's the WMC plan is out there. I know some legislators have been working on some plans, but we don't really think it should be, at least at this point, a governor's plan and a GOP plan. We think we should be negotiating on what's best for the state, instead of throwing, putting red lines in the sand or lines in the sand saying, this is ours, this is yours, and then, having that big fight. We should be trying everything we can to negotiate in the meantime. If worse comes to worse and we can't find that common ground, then of course we're going to have to come out with something showing exactly what we think is a reasonable approach. A lot of that is going to be regional in nature, using social distancing at businesses throughout the state in order to be able to reopen faster. I just don't think that there's any reason that Home Depot and Menards and all these other places can reopen or be open safely using social distancing, but every other outlet throughout the state can't. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to people I talk to.
Do you foresee us ever getting to testing everyone? So I know Brown County has the drive-up testing. I know that in Winnebago and Outagamie counties, there hasn't been as much testing. Do you see that ever kind of happening in the future now that testing is more prevalent, that we have tests?
Yeah, I know that's part of the governor's goal is part of his plan says that, you need to be able to test 85,000 people a week. Quite honestly, part of the problem is there hasn't been the demand for that many tests. I mean, I think currently we have the capacity to do 11,000 tests a day. So we're close to that 85,000. We might be at 85 now. It changes every day. But we've been testing up until now about 2,500 or 3,000 people a day. So while our capacity is much higher, the demand for these tests haven't been there. Now, I know the administration is making a big push for nursing homes over the course of this month to make sure that everybody that works or lives in a nursing home gets a test. Laudable goal. But part of the problem with testing everybody, whether they're symptomatic or not, is the negative test really only means something for that day. Doesn't mean anything going forward. So you can get a negative test today, be exposed tomorrow, and then you're infected. So I don't know how much good testing everybody is. We should be testing people that are symptomatic first, and then people that have been exposed to that person that is symptomatic second, to make sure that we're following up where we can, to make sure that the spread isn't occurring.
Okay. Kind of shifting gears, DOA Secretary Brennan announced a 5% reduction in state operations for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Obviously, this is a major concern because revenues are going to be coming in and expenses are going to increase. What are your impressions? What are your thoughts about that 5% reduction in budget?
I think it's a good start. I think that it's a wise move to try to start to control spending, because as we go forward, we all know that revenues are going to drop. We had an $800 million projected surplus 6 weeks ago. We assume that is already gone, and that we're looking at probably deficits going forward. So that 5% reduction for agencies means about a $70 million savings to the state. You know, not a small amount of money, but probably small in the grand scheme of things of how much we're going to need to plug that hole. I know the governor said that they're expecting about a $2 billion drop in revenue, which is significant. So what we've asked, the Republicans in the legislature have asked the governor to consider doing is freezing spending in the second year to what the first year spending was. So, you know, going into the second year of the budget, continuing to increase spending as was laid out in the budget from a year ago, doesn't make a lot of sense, because you're going to end up then with deeper and more draconian cuts come next year when we do have that budget deficit. So we're asking them to freeze state spending in the second year to ensure we're doing everything that we can in the short term to control that growth in spending.
Okay. Just to remind folks that if you have a question, you can put it into the chat. And it doesn't have to be COVID-19 related, because I do have a few questions that are not COVID-19, because life still goes on, right? We still have transportation projects and other things that the state is working on. So feel free to put your questions in the chat feature and I will ask them. Representative Steineke, this is my last COVID-19 related question. It's regarding AB 1038 and how it handles the presumption of workers' compensation for first responders and medical personnel. That was a provision that was originally in the budget, or originally in that bill, and then pulled out. Just wondering, you know, what the legislature, or how the legislature is really kind of addressing that concern.
Well, it wasn't pulled out in entirety, right? It was changed and modified to a certain point where now the presumption is that if a public safety worker was exposed or has had contact with a COVID-19 person, somebody that's tested positive, then the presumption would be that they got it at work. That's the main thing that was in the bill. The original language was took it a little bit further in saying that if somebody working in public safety tested positive, it was just presumed that they got it at the job site, whether they had contact with somebody that tested positive or not. So it was scaled back a bit, but it still went further than what current law or prior law was.
Okay. So, you know, Representative Steineke, you and I talk about transportation projects a lot. I've over the years, I've bombarded you about Southern Bridge project and highway projects, and you know, Interstate 41, while traffic is down, the need to expand the lanes from 4 to 6 lanes is still there. Are there any updates, any information of how that process is going? I know there's a lot of environmental reviews and things that need to be done right now. Any updates that you can share with us?
Yeah, still going through the planning process. I was really appreciative under Governor Walker when we as a coalition came forward and asked him to start the planning process for this. He immediately said he would. You know, I think that was August of whatever year that was, before the election last time, last gubernatorial election. So he came out and started the planning process. Governor Evers has continued that. You know, of course, with any project of this size and scope, it is not something that's going to happen in the next year or two, but hopefully within the next 4 to 5 years, we'll be able to break ground on actually expanding this, because I drive it every day, especially as I get on the little chute exit heading south. In the morning, it's tough. I mean, it's bumper to bumper going into Appleton, and if anything happens along that stretch, then you got miles of backups, whether it's an officer pulling somebody over or an accident. It really has some serious implications for traffic flow. And that not only inconveniences, obviously, you know, people trying to get to work and where they're going, but it also impacts commerce, because the number of trucks using Highway 41 coming from Green Bay or going to Green Bay is enormous, as we all know, and is continuing to grow every year. So it's critical that we keep working with the administration, make sure that this continues moving forward. As I see it now, it is. So we'll just have to kind of keep an eye on that. I don't know what the timeline is right now, but I would expect it's a few years out before we would break ground.
Yeah, I had heard at one point that 2026 or 2025 was construction. 2025 or 2026 was where construction activities would start. So
yeah, it sounds reasonable. Obviously, if there's ways that we can expedite that, we will do everything we can. But obviously, with some of the rules, not only at the state level, but especially at the federal level on these environmental impact studies and everything else, it really slows down the process. So if the federal government ever really wanted to do something to help speed along projects like this, they could do a lot through regulatory reform.
Mm-hmm. Another highway project that is really important for safety reasons is the Highway 15 bypass. And not only is it really important for safety, but a lot of our communities out there are trying to plan their economic development around that bypass. I'm assuming that the same is true, that it's moving forward as planned through the same process.
Yep, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think groundbreaking for that was 2021 for majority of the project.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, so I think everything I've heard on that is that it's continuing to move forward. Obviously, that's another one, more in my mind, more for safety than anything else, as we've seen a number of tragic accidents out on that stretch of road that have cost lives. So, moving that forward is something that all of our legislators in the area were supportive of. We were glad to get the governor on board to moving that forward in a quicker time frame as well.
Perfect. Another question from the audience, just kind of going back to COVID-19, a big concern, and I can't believe I didn't ask this. So thank you, Keith, for reminding me, is that liability for businesses. Is there going to be some kind of protections for businesses as we reopen against claims that they are, responsible for individuals, getting COVID?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know there was some liability protections in the last bill the legislature passed for healthcare workers relating to COVID-19. As far as business owners themselves, I can't answer that. That's something that we would be interested in taking the chamber's input on as we look towards developing any new package of legislation. Right now, unless the federal government did something like that, it would be up to the state. Right now, I don't know that we're going to be in session anytime soon. More so because this is the time of the year where a time of the two-year cycle that we're out of session, but we're kind of waiting for the federal government to act on their next set of legislation before we come back in and address anything that they've done. So if there's an opportunity to look at things like that going forward, I think there's a willingness to do so, especially if government is telling businesses exactly what they should be doing and how they should be protecting their customers. Then I can see I can see why there would be a desire to have some kind of immunity from liability for things like that.
Another question that just came in is that there are 13,000 hospital beds, only 350 of them have COVID-19 patients. Is this the best way to measure COVID-19 issues versus sorry. Is this I'm trying to read and moderate at the same time. It's working out for me so well. Is this the best way to measure COVID-19 and are moving on from it, are kind of getting over that hurdle?
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, one of the frustrations is that we see the media continually reporting on these outbreaks, right? And the number of new positive tests every day. Well, that's one measurement, and honestly, we're going to have more positives and an increase in positive tests every day. That shouldn't be the metric because we're testing more. So of course you're going to find more people that are positive. This has always been about, from the medical professionals, this has always been about keeping the hospitals from being overrun. That's one of the things that is really frustrating from our point of view, is that it seems like some people, a lot of politicians want to move that goalpost, and it's not become about overrunning the hospitals. It's about, keeping the spread flat forever. Well, we're not going to be able to do that. We can't get down to 0 cases. It's just not realistic. There are going to be people at whatever point in time that we reopen, unless we wait until there's a vaccine, which I can't see doing. There are going to be people that get infected. There are going to be people that get sick. So we have to do everything we can to mitigate that. But waiting until there's a vaccine isn't reasonable. And this has always been about making sure hospitals aren't overrun. We have done that job. We have successfully kept the hospitals from being overrun until such a time as they have enough supplies, enough PPE, enough testing capability, and all that. That's what we really need to look at going forward as to how we open up. Is as long as the hospitals are prepared for any outbreaks and they can handle it, then we should start to open up that door. We can't continually let some people move the goalposts and keep us closed down indefinitely, because there are some people that are well-meaning, but if it were up to them, we would not open anytime soon, or at least until there's a vaccine.
Okay. Just a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the chat feature. And then, I have one last question for you, Representative Steineke. And I always say one last, and then I always come up with a few more. So I apologize. But this time of year, typically when I talk to you, it is about kind of a wrap up of what the highlights of the session. And it seems like that was so long ago. Any items that you personally worked on or the legislature worked on that you think that really stand out in your mind that were a great benefit and that you want to share with us today?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It seems like everything that we did in this last legislative session was 2 years ago. I mean, every day that goes by seems like a week in today's world. But I think some of the things personally I'm really proud of is continuing to move the ball forward on helping kids with mental health issues. We passed a pilot, and the governor signed it for Outagamie County, where we're going to start working with the schools. The Medical College of Wisconsin is going to develop a program working with the schools to deliver access to mental health care directly into the schools, working with the staff more so than one-to-one with the kids, but working with the staff within the schools to help educate them on the signs of mental illness, what that looks like, how they can best deal with kids that have mental illnesses, and then triaging kids right there in the schools that present with some critical cases of mental illness. That's based off of a pilot program we did with pediatricians called the Child Psychiatry Consultation Program. That was specifically for pediatricians working with mental health professionals. This just extends it into our schools. So we're really excited about that. That's probably the biggest thing. And then I also had a piece of legislation that we passed that helps deal with instances where kids are out of the home of their parents. They're in guardianship situations. Prior law, and we've seen terrible cases and examples of where prior law did not work for kids, where they were put back into homes that were abusive and not safe. The law that we passed, working with Democrats, is making sure that the courts can always take the best interest of the child into consideration when placing a kid. Believe it or not, that wasn't always even a consideration because the court's hands were tied. It was more about parental rights, and if the parental rights in the state were very strong and deservedly so, but there also has to be a balance when it comes to putting kids in obviously abusive situations with parents. So that's something I think kind of flew under the radar, but it's going to have a big impact for our kids.
Well, and I think it's extremely timely considering now the circumstances that we're at, that there's the pilot program for the mental health, which mental health is a big concern for a lot of people right now. And then handling, doing what's best for those kids as well. It all is extremely important at this point in time. So thank you for your work on that. We have a couple more questions from the chat. So 2020 is obviously an election year as a candidate.
Really?
Surprise!
I haven't heard.
How has the process been gathering nomination papers? How do you see retail politics of campaigning changing right now?
Yeah, there won't really be any real retail politics, right? I mean, it is going to be a really odd year for candidates, and this is where if anybody wants to be helpful, whether it's for Republicans or Democrats, if you want to be helpful for the candidate that you support, signing nomination papers, even if it's just you and your spouse, and sending them back to the candidate is incredibly helpful. We have to, in the state assembly, we have to gather between 200 and 400 signatures, typically about 250 to be on the safe side at least. And obviously we can't go door to door. Standing out in front of a store and gathering signatures is a little bit weird these days too. So what we're asking people to do is download the form, print it off, sign it, just friends and family or even neighbors, and then send it back to us. And by and large, it's been really successful. People understand, kind of the unique dilemma we're in, and they're really stepping up to help out. But that's one thing that members could do if they wanted to help out. But then going forward, I mean, the summer is going to look totally different. All these big events where politicians usually gather and press the flesh aren't happening by and large. Parades are probably not going to happen this year. There's going to be a lot of changes, and it's just going to really change the way we reach out to voters. And it's unfortunate because the retail politics, getting to be face-to-face with people out in the community is really the best way that we can not only get our message out there, but then also learn from our constituents on how best to represent them.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be an interesting time. But the thing about that I've noticed is that people are more willing to help out, and there's like this great sense of we're in this together. So I hope that translates into helping elect some really great people that do some great stuff for our state. Another question from the chat line is about going back to the liability, to eliminate liability against COVID-19. So if the government's going to tell us, give us direction on how we can be open for business again, and a business does follow the rules and still gets sued, wouldn't that make the case for some kind of liability protections? If we follow your rules, we do everything that the experts are telling us, and we still get sued, shouldn't we have some protections?
100% agree. I mean, especially if the government is going to give you all the best practices and make you follow those regulations, if you follow what the government says to a T, I don't see why you should have incur any liability. It just makes sense to me. Obviously, government isn't always about common sense, but I think in this case, hopefully, we can all kind of wrap our arms around this in a piece of legislation going forward, if need be, because there's a whole lot of things that we're going to have to tackle that help businesses get back up on their feet, and I think avoiding costly, frivolous lawsuits is probably one of those.
Yeah, thank you. So we're coming up close to our time. I am out of questions. So Representative Steineke, if you anything that we missed that you wanted to talk about or address?
No, just know that, and I know for a lot of business owners out there, this is an extremely difficult time. People have spent their entire lives building businesses only to see a lot of them are going to disappear over the course of the next few days and few weeks. And that's extremely frustrating, I know, not only for them, but for us as well. We're doing everything that we can to convince the governor to allow people to, in a common sense way, to start opening up in areas where we don't have dramatic outbreaks, and do so in a way that keeps not only the safety of their employees, but also the safety of the public in mind. So just know that we're working every day to try to make a difference, to ensure that you guys can survive this incredibly difficult time. Because if government is involved in shutting you down, you shouldn't lose your life's work because of that. So we'll continue to do everything that we can to get to a place that's more reflective of what's really going on out there.
Well said. So thank you so very much for your time and for everyone's participation. I hope you all stay safe and healthy, and that we can get back to business soon. So thank you all, and I wish you all a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.